for the first few hands, the seat position I'm at is not great. I can only angle my phone a certain way that, as you can see, does not capture a very nice view for you guys. Sorry that you have to bear with that. Anyways, very early on, I think this might be my second hand. I pick up pocket kings at the hijack position. Under the gun opens to $16. Everyone folds to me and I 3-bet to $40. Everyone folds but the initial raiser, who calls. It's heads up into a flop of Queen 10-8 with 2 clubs. The villain checks. No ace on the flop, which is good. I have a club blocker. The effective stack is pretty low here compared to the pot size, so I'm pretty much just aiming to get it all in. Pocket aces shouldn't be in here, and if I'm beat by a set, then so be it. I c-bet for $50, setting up for a turn jam. The villain check raises me, all in. Not going to be folding kings here with that stack depth, so I call. We go to a run out of 10 on the turn and 3 of clubs on the river. We table our hands, and I lose this one to pocket queens for the flop set. Not a particularly great start to this session. This hand, I pick up pocket sixes on the button. Under the gun +1 raises to $16. Only the low jack calls. I call to set mine. The big blind also calls. It's 4-way into a flop of 7-8-4 rainbow. The big blind checks. +1 c-bets for $35. The low jack folds. With a gut shot and pair against the aggressor that doesn't have the range advantage, I call. The big blind folds and it's now heads up. The turn is the 10 of clubs. The villain now checks. The board still favors my range much more than the villain's. I think the turn card does help me as I improve to a double gutter. My pair, though, is weaker now that there are 3 overcards on board, but I do heavily block 2 of the straights, 6-5 and 6-9. Hands that are in my range but shouldn't be in the villain's. I have some showdown value, so I think checking and navigating to showdown is okay. If I bet, it would be for protection and keeping the betting lead, in case I need to set up for a third barrel. I choose the latter. So far, I have only showdown pocket kings, so my image is pretty solid. I bet $100. With this sizing, I should be able to fold out hands like 2 high cards. If I get called, depending on the run out, a third barrel repping a strong hand is still credible. The villain calls. The river is a brick. The villain checks again. My SPR is close to 1 as set up. I am now contemplating if my hand is good enough for showdown or if I need to turn my pair into a bluff. Since the villain called the turn bet, I think there's a chance he might have some kind of pocket pair looking for a showdown. So I decide to jam all in here. I can still rep 5-6 or 6-9, which is either the flop straight or open-ender that got there on the turn. Both of these hands I block and would make sense to take this line. The villain tanks for a little while, and then finds the fold. The table breaks, and I get moved to another one with a better position and angle. This hand, I pick up 6-8 of clubs on the button. The low jack opens to $16. Everyone folds to me and I call. Both of the blinds call. It's 4-way into a flop of 3-4-5 rainbow. The small blind leads out for $25. The big blind calls. The low jack folds. Easy call for me with an open-ender and draw to the nuts straight. The turn is a king. The small blind now leads out for $100. The big blind calls again. I am getting pretty good pot odds here. I still have the nut draw, and I could potentially be stacking someone with a 6 if the 7 comes. So the implied odds with my hand is pretty great. I call. The river breaks. The small blind leads out yet again for $100, and the big blind calls. Not much more for me to do here, but let go of 8 high. This hand, I pick up pocket aces in the big blind. There's a button straddle to $6. The small blind folds. I raise it to $20. The middle position, cutoff, and button calls. It's four-way into a flop of 4-5 Jack Rainbow. Nice dry flop for pocket aces. I just value bet for half pot at $40, targeting Jack X. Only the cutoff calls. The turn is another 5, another great card, keeping the board dry. I just continue value betting at half pot, this time at $80. The cutoff thinks for a little while and folds. This hand, I pick up Queen 10 at the hijack position. There's a button straddle to $6. Small blind calls, the middle position calls, and the low jack calls. I decide to make a play for the dead money and raise it up to $35. Only the button calls. It's heads up into a flop of Queen 5 deuce with 2 clubs. Great flop hitting top pair. I c-bet for $30. The villain calls. The turn is a 7 of hearts, essentially a brick. I want to keep betting for value. I'm blocking both flush draws, so I don't want to go too big here, because I'm targeting one pair hands that lose to me, which would mostly be weaker pocket pairs that don't believe me. If the villain has a Queen X hand, he is likely beating me. I decide on a sizing of half pot at $75. The villain calls. The river is a 5 of hearts. This completes a backdoor flush, and trip 5s gets there. I do block hearts, so not too concerned about the backdoor flush. With the turn bet and call, it's also hard to imagine that the villain is getting sticky with a 5. I continue to target pocket pairs that lose to me, and go for one more street of value. I bet $60 looking for a crying call. The villain folds. This hand, I pick up 5-4 of spades at the cutoff. Only under the gun +1 limps before the action is on me. I raise it up to $15. The button folds, the small blind calls, the big blind calls, and the limper, surprisingly, folds. It's 3-way into a flop of ace queen king with 2 spades. Immediately, I'm thinking this is a great flop, hits my range, and actually gives me decent equity with a flush draw. So it's going to be a good spot to c-bet. However, after the small blind checks, the big blind bets $15. Seeing that his stack is quite short, I think raising here is probably not wise. I call. The small blind folds. The turn is a jack. The villain goes all in with his remaining stack, and I lay this one down. This hand, I pick up ace king on the button. Under the gun limps. Everyone else folds and the action is on me. I raise it up to $20. The big blind calls and the limper folds. It's heads up into a flop of 9-5-4, all spades. The villain checks. Not a great flop for my range. I do hold the king of spades, which is nice. I check back. The turn is a king. The villain checks again. I have now improved to top pair with the second nut flush draw. I decide to bet for value, targeting any pair or high spade. I bet $15. The villain calls. The river is a 9. The villain checks again. With this run out, I think I have the best hand here with the best 2 pair. As played, the villain could have any 2 pair hand, including king with a weaker kicker. I decide to go for a value bet of $25, looking to get a crying call. The villain, however, decides to min raise and makes it $50. That's $25 more for me. Not feeling too great right now. At these stakes, this line of check raising on the river is usually super strong. I really don't see myself beating any value hands, but the price is just so good. So it turns out that I am the one to make the crying call here. I call. The villain tables Jack Queen of Spades for the flop flush. Well played, sir. This hand, I pick up Ace-7 of clubs at under the gun +1. I open to $10. There are 3 callers, including the big blind. It's 4-way into a flop of Jack 4-10 with 2 spades. Everyone checks. The turn is a 10 of clubs. The big blind checks to me. Seeing that everyone checked the flop, and now that I've picked up extra equity with the nut flush draw, I think this is a good spot to take a jab. I bet $30. Only the low jack calls. The river is the queen of clubs. Awesome card giving me the nut flush. The villain stack is very close to an SPR of 1, so I think there's just one move left for me. I go all in. The villain calls. We table our hands and I beat 8-9 for the straight. This hand, I pick up 9-10 of hearts on the big blind. The middle position and hijack limps. The button raises to $10. The small blind folds. I call and the limpers also call. It's four-way into a flop of Jack 10-6 rainbow. Everyone checks to the button, who c-bets for $20. I only have second pair with not a great kicker. In a multi-way pot, this is not a strong hand at all. In fact, I should be letting it go most of the time. But against the pre-flop raiser, who is c-betting in position, I call. Everyone else folds, which is good news. The turn is a 7. I check. The villain checks back. The river is a 4, essentially a brick. With how the hand played out so far, I think I'm likely in the lead with my pair. The villain probably has two high cards like ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen. I don't think leading out with a value bet makes sense, as the villain doesn't have a hand I can extract any value from. Checking to him will give him an opportunity to bluff, and that seems like the way to go. I check. The villain thinks for a bit and decides to bet $40. This is about half pot. Pretty easy call in this spot, though I do contemplate for a brief moment if I need to turn my hand into a check raise bluff, just in case he has a value hand that chose to pot control by checking the turn. I do block the straight, and I can rep that with my line. In the end, I just go with my initial plan. I call. The villain mucks, and I table my hand to take it down. This hand, I pick up king 10 on the big blind. Everyone folds to the button, who opens to $10. The small blind folds, and the action is on me. Against a late position open, if the small blind had called, I would likely 3-bet squeeze here, but now since I close the action, I can just call to defend, which is what I do. It's heads up into a flop of Jack Queen 7 rainbow. Pretty good to flop an open ender, but not going to lead out here. I check. The villain c-bets for $10. Easy call for me. The turn is an 8. I check again. The villain bets again for $25. Not a bad price for me to chase. And if he does have something pretty strong, there are implied odds here, so I call. The river breaks. The way this hand played out, I think my hand is pretty face up, so not much more for me to do but check. The villain checks back. We table our hands, and we actually end up chopping with the same hand. This hand, I pick up Jack 4 of clubs at the cutoff. Everyone folds to me, and I open to $10. Only the big blind calls. It's heads up into a flop of deuce 3-9 with 2 hearts. The villain checks. The flop doesn't hit my range nor my hand. I decide to check back. The turn is the 4 of clubs. The villain checks again. I now have second pair, even though there is a flush possibility on board. With the villain checking twice, I decide to bet big here. I'm likely to be in the lead with my pair, and my pair is a low one that could use some protection against overcards. I bet $20, targeting protection and maybe value from a high card heart. The villain calls. The river is an ace. The villain checks the third time. Not a great run out. Ace of hearts gets there. Open ender on the turn gets there. I have a little bit of showdown value, so I don't think I necessarily need to turn my hand into a bluff. I check back and hope I'm beating a random holding with a high card heart. The villain tables 3-4 for the turn 2 pair. Well played, sir. This hand, I pick up King Jack on the button. The hijack opens to $15. I defend and everyone else folds. It's heads up into a flop of Queen 10-7 with 2 hearts. The villain c-bets for $40. Pretty big sizing. With an open ender and backdoor flush draw, I'm not going anywhere quite yet. I call. The turn is an 8. The villain leads out again, this time for $45. I didn't hit my open ender and didn't pick up any extra equity, but he is giving me a pretty good price, so I call. The river is a queen. The villain now checks. My draw completely bricked, and I am left with king high. However, the villain checking the river is indicative of that the queen is actually a scare card for him. My hand blocks quite a few queen x combos. With my line, I can credibly rep a queen. I think this is a good spot to turn my hand into a bluff. I need to fold out all pocket pairs and ace highs with flush draw or straight draws. There are a lot of hands that will easily get through. Only thing I'm slightly worried about is the villain getting sticky with an overpair. I go ahead and jam all in. And the villain folds. Here are the results of the session that you just watched. Started out pretty rough with a cooler hand. I got pocket kings and ran into a set of queens, but I did manage to battle it back up and ended with a small profit. Yeah, it was actually a really short session. I'm trying my best to put in as much volume as I can, which would include these kind of like short sessions with small slots of time that I can just fit in there. Anyways, profit of $130, which coincidentally is the same thing as the session from before, which was also at Great Canadian Casino. And that brings my total bankroll to this number you see right here. And that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. And I hope you guys look forward to the next.